Peace. This is Beniti. We're on Primordial Chaos. Sounds real spooky, huh? Primordial. Maybe stop fucking around. So peace. Greetings, everybody. It is Friday, February 22nd, Day of the Sith Ritual. We kind of excited. Just got off the phone. Getting some of these last minute arrangements set up. We got people here, getting ready to come. I'm excited about the ritual. It's something very different. It's going to be something is the best word I'm going to describe. So excited about that. So we are on the day of the ritual. I also wanted to kind of talk about and recap. Got a lot of, woke up this morning to get a lot of positive feedback on last night's show with Dr. Bynum, who was on Primordial Chaos Radio last night. A lot of you sent emails. I got some text also this morning. People commenting on how much they enjoyed the show. And as I was in the gym this morning, about an hour ago, as I started doing this video, hour before I just hit the record button on this video, Dr. Bynum gave me a call, and we had a conversation. He wanted, obviously asked about the feedback, and I said, wow, it's funny that you had called and asked about that, because obviously, as usual, when we get him on, we always get good positive feedback. He said he had, quote unquote, a very good time. He enjoyed himself last night. And we also arranged a date for him to return to the show, which will be April 18th. He will be traveling out of the country for a little bit. As I said, he does extensively travel. And I look to kind of try to get him on consistently throughout the year, maybe every 6 weeks or so, or something like that, or every 2 months, or whatever it might be, in accordance with his schedule. So he will be back on the show April 18th. And as I said last night, if you don't have his books, outside of Light Conciousness, he's authored several books. The African Unconscious is a very good book. He's got a book on dealing with family from a spiritual and a psychological level. He tackles a lot of areas, and one thing which he does talk about in his books a little bit, and I mentioned it a little bit last night, he is initiated in a lot of those traditions and systems that he talks about in the book, and you hear him talk about in the show. And he actually went to those countries. It's not something he did here. And again, I've found he's probably a few years back when I first encountered his work. That was probably one of the first people, authors, and material that kind of changed my whole outlook on spirituality and consciousness. Path to self-mastery led me to other areas. Now, as I said before, and I know most listeners know this, he's not per se a left-hand path, like some of us would kind of use that description to describe the path we're on. He does deal with aspects of it. He mentions it in his book, especially the Dravidian, or what some might know as the Hindu left-hand path aspect. He's very familiar with working with aspects of Kali from a left-hand path aspect, etc. So he does have some connections with it, but it's important to understand. If I had to categorize, which I don't like to do, kind of what perspective Dr. Bynum's coming from, I would say it's very neutral in nature, because he deals with such a wide variety of topics, from my point of view, in a highly spiritual, mental, psychological. His history is on point for those that, if you're into scholarship and history. I know some people get too caught up in that. And he's very neutral. I say neutral because he don't really subscribe to one particular ideology. That's not his thing. And that's usually a telltale sign. I would definitely classify him as being on a path to self-mastery. Somebody that's not exclusive to one thing, in my opinion, and well-rounded, to me, regardless, is on the path of self-mastery. They're very open. They're able to explore their consciousness. They're able to explore themselves. And they're not, held down by any of these ideologies, belief systems, or dogmas. And as you can hear that in his work, you can hear that when he talks, when he's on the show. And I've always recommended, along with the 7 Hermetic Principles, or what some people know as the Kabbalion by the 3 Initiates, and Dr. Bynum's book as Dark Light Consciousness, as great areas to start on this path. Now, the Dark Light Consciousness, why I focus on it so much, I think it removes all the spookiness with what this dark side or darkness is. And there was a question that Sister Baffle Margaret had posted last night. That was a good question about dark side energy. And what I think Dr. Bynum's book does is that dark side represents that core essence, that hidden intelligence. We can connect it with so many different things. We can connect it with the primordial chaotic energy. We can connect it to aspects or the pathways and roadways of the neuromelanin of our brain. But when it says that, darkness enfolds the light, and out of, darkness comes the light, and that's what it means. One must go into the darkness to do the work of the light, because everything is engulfed in that darkness. So one must go back to that point to really connect with their true essence of themselves, their relationship of themselves to nature, whether you want to call it the micro and the macrocosm, that's fine. All of those things, okay? All of those things, in my opinion, remove all the spookiness. So I think still some people get caught up with, when they hear the darkness, the dark side, dark energy, dark magic, they automatically, their mind wanders to spooky, scary shit that they've been indoctrinated with via social media platforms. And Dr. Bynum pointed out a very important thing that I want to stress again here. When we were talking about voodoo or voodoo, when he was talking about the Loa and some of the African spiritual systems, and how it's been, criticized and made as something evil or negative, because it's mostly Western writers and Western philosophers that are doing that. And as he said, that was their intent. Of course, it comes across as that. When he was talking about the trans-dimensional being, or the trans-dimensional being, and I wanted to point that out to show people this thing called possession or getting mounted. It's really showing you how, when you open yourself up via those sounds and vibrations, when we were talking about that, as he said, a whole nother aspect of vibrational frequency and energy takes control of you via the movements, the dance, etc. And this is why he even correlated that to how some of these Loa or Rishi are identified with these specific movements or dance, which confirms the presence of that particular archetype or deity is amongst you or present. So let's make that crystal clear, okay? I want to make that crystal clear. I thought that was very important and critical for those that are still trying to understand, quote unquote, this phenomenon of possession. I hate that word, but I got to use a word people are most familiar with, or being mounted by the Loa, the spirits, or the Orishi, or any particular spiritual system that deals with possession of spirits or demons or whatever fuck term you want to use. But the point being is, I think the element, in my opinion, that Dr. Bynum brings is he removes the spookism from it, because he's coming from a scientifical, psychological, historical, spiritual, all those things. And another important statement, that he correlated to the ancient Egyptians. Like he said, them ancient civilizations didn't separate spirituality, didn't separate what we know. Now, when he's used the word religion, and I clarified that on the show, not so much religion in the modern day term sense, but religion which would back then identify their spiritual practices, rituals and work, things of that nature, their spirituality, science. Like he said, their approach and on their path, they used all those things in conjunction with each other and in harmony. And that's important to understand, because that's exactly what we do on this path. We don't separate those two. The problem is, human beings, because of their insecurities, because of their human frailties, because of their fears, they tend to be they are the ones that separate, classify, and categorize all this shit. You understand? Because they gravitate towards what makes them feel comfortable, which gives them an opportunity, in my opinion, to cover and mask their fears. So they get into, let's say, a modern day, and I say modern day aspect of Christianity because we know real Christianity, or the Coptic Christians of Northeast Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, the Christianity that they were practicing, during those times when Christianity, quote unquote, was in its pristine purity, had no way, shape, form, or fashion of how it's practiced today. The concept of the Messiah, the rituals, the whole nine. It's different when we use, that term. But people that hide in those modern day forms of monotheism, and it's not just Christianity, it's Islam and Judaism, they tend to get in these, stay in the box faiths and dogmas. Be good. If you're good, there's a great reward waiting for you at the end of the rainbow. But if you're bad, all this great, punishment and all this evil and wickedness, and you're going to be tortured and cast into the pit of hell and all this fear and emotions. So people, because of their ignorance, not taking the time to really research and study and find the truth for themselves, they tend to fall for this crap. And then what it does in turn, it creates tunnel vision. What is tunnel vision? It's like having blinders on. It's like a horse. If you have been to the horse races or a racetrack, they put blinders on the horses so they can only see in front of them. So as they're racing, things that are taking place on the side of them don't distract them, right? That's what I'm talking about. A lot of people have spiritual blinders on, right? They're not aware of what's going on around them. They're focused on this religion that they're caught up in, that's created this tunnel vision, and all they see is that. That's it. And we're not talking about that aspect. When I say not talking about that aspect, when I was just mentioning religion a minute ago. So understand the difference of what we're calling religion today is not quite what it was during them times when Dr. Bynum was talking about ancient Egypt and the ancient cultures and civilizations that combined all these concepts. It was one thing, right? We've lost sight of that now. It's broken down into, humans have grafted what they're comfortable with and have made denominations and whole religions out of these things, right? But back to the essence of this darkness thing that still seems to be, an issue with people that may not be on this path. And when I say an issue with people that are not on this path, again, I want to make clear, like I have to many times, I'm not talking about just religious people. I'm talking about, quote unquote, people who claim to be conscious, people who claim to study ancient Egypt and Africa, when all enshrouded in ancient Egypt and Africa is this dark magic, is this dark energy, is witchcraft, is sorcery, magic, Heka in ancient Egypt. The list goes on and on and on. But they're never talking about this shit as if it doesn't exist. And as soon as you start talking about dark magic, dark energy, etc., as soon as you start talking about it, because out of their fear and ignorance, then they start passing judgment. It was funny last night. I'll tell you, man. This just goes to show you the sickness and the illness and the poison that modern day monotheism corrupts the mind. We had a spooky ass person in the chat last night. It was very comical, and I know a couple people were kind of jabbing at him, but I removed him from the fucking room because it's not a religious forum. Some dude had a name, or I don't know if it was a dude, it could have been a girl, I don't know. I am Jesus incarnate. So I guess Jesus now hangs out on YouTube hangout forums. Now I'm using this as an example. Why am I bringing this up? It goes to show you the power of the mind. Now, whoever that person is, they really believe in their mind that that's who they are, regardless of what we think. And that's not what I got an issue with. But where they struggle with is, though that's actually brought on by some subjective experience they've had, but where they struggle and don't have a good, thorough understanding, wow, that was fucking dumb. Where they struggle and don't have a thorough understanding, which is kind of fucked up and bad, is they get frustrated when people don't want to validate and co-sign and sign off on their personal subjective experience. You understand? That's where they get the struggle, because they want everybody else to accept whatever it is they're experiencing, and it's just quite comical. The other factor is, as I've made clear many times before in many videos, remember, my channel, my forum, it's not a religious forum. Yes, we do address in certain situations, scenarios, and certain aspects of religion, spirituality, you will hear it. But don't get that twisted. We're not interested, let me say this, not interested at all to be distracted with nonsense and bullshit. As you know, occasionally here and there, somebody come in the room, we just completely remove them from the room. Because what that does is distract from the focus and the energy of the work that we're doing. And as I said before, we're way past those stages. We don't fuck with that no more. If we can't hold intelligent dialogue, then we just don't have it. You understand? And as I said, where I'm at my point, I'm too old for that shit. And not only that, I would fear for somebody, and I don't say this out of arrogance, I say it out of confidence, I would fear for somebody who would want to go that route, per se, with me, because I'll make you think, rethink your whole existence on whatever spiritual bullshit you think you know. And I don't say that out of arrogance, I say it out of confidence. So I know where I can go with it, and I try not to bring myself that place. You understand? So it's a waste of time. And really, again, the most important thing, it distracts from the build. We're not interested in that. Most people that participate in the channel, the forums, to come to the rituals and the work we do here, their intent is to grow, evolve, and change. That's the goal. And at this stage in our journey, we're not interested in being distracted with, you're not going to backtrack us and set us back, tons of steps and get us into religious rhetoric and debate. Okay, it's a waste of time and energy. Look, if we still got to argue that shit in 2019, especially those that are on a higher path of evolution, change, and growth, on this path of self-mastery, it's comical. You understand? But again, so this whole spookiness of darkness, and again, if you do not have the book, I would definitely, and really it connects, one thing I mentioned last night, really what it seriously connects with is that whole concept of the first hermetic principle of Tahuti, right? All is mental, mental is all, the universe is mental, all things have its origin in the mind, the brain. What are we talking about? Well, as we know, the neuromelanin, which is created in the stem of the brain, I've talked about this before, which creates those avenues or highways, as we discussed last night, of consciousness. It has to pass through there, and the neuromelanin is the key facilitator and conductor of that. And he also talked about melanin itself. I can't remember, somebody posed a question about the organs being encoded in melanin, and I've talked about that many times over the years. And so this phenomenon that we call these different aspects of melanin exist to the point where neuro, as you hear, deals with neurological, and we know neurological aspect deals with the brain. We see the importance of that, and all that happens in the darkness, right? We use the term the deep, dark abyss of your subconscious mind. What is the deep, dark abyss of your subconscious mind? Well, an aspect of that is having those pathways and roadways via the neuromelanin open and clear so you can receive those messages, right? When then somebody had asked about the pineal, right? What's the importance of the pineal not being calcified and activated? It's all connected. That's how you get in tune with your real self. That's how you're able to go into that darkness and absorb, quote unquote, dark light consciousness, all right? This is important to understand because you're getting a whole different breakdown and perspective of it. Again, removing all the fluffy shit, right? Removing all the bullshit, removing all the aesthetics, removing all the sensationalism and fear stories that are created about. Because again, when people hear the dark side, right? Magic, dark magic, black magic, spookiness. And again, I'm talking about so-called conscious people who say they study African spirituality. And again, all throughout our African spiritual systems, you see witchcraft, sorcery, magic, Heka in ancient Egypt, and nobody's talking about it. Nobody's talking about it on any level, any shape, form, or fashion. And there's a reason for that. One, as I said many times before, because they don't know. Right? Now, which ties it into, again, the ritual and the work that's getting ready to take place this evening. And as you know, over the last couple of weeks leading up to the ritual, I've been doing a lot of videos on the Sith path, right? Which Sith is a whole aspect of the ritual that connects it to Set. I'm not going to get into all that. I'm going to shoot a little clip afterwards that'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. But I've done videos the last couple of weeks leading up to the ritual on the Sith path. The Sith path is a very intense path that takes you into that darkness. To understand every single aspect of your mind and how to tap into it, right? We followed it up with the video from, Tuesday? Yeah, this past Tuesday, the Saber Mind and the 4 Dimensions of Power. Now, I bring that up because we're talking about, right, one thing we talked about last night was the triune brain, right? The psychological aspect and power of the mind, right? The Saber Mind really deals with understanding, quote unquote, what Dr. Bynum per se has in the book on the triune mind, right? Sharpening the Saber Mind, right? In order for one to do that, here's one of the most important things I want to draw out from last night. And I want to tie it into the Saber Mind, willpower, and in correlation to all these different spiritual systems, philosophies that we talk about. And I talked a little bit about it last night, but I want to reiterate it again in case you missed it. Like you said, what these spiritual systems were trying to teach the individual, the neophyte, the initiate, was how to still and quiet the mind to prepare them to be able to be receptive and receive the messages, the different levels of consciousness. And as I said many times before, the problem is in a lot of these dogmas and cultures and philosophies that people will subscribe to, people either constantly talking and praying and whatever it is they're doing, that they never ever do any internal work where they sit in silence and still the mind, quiet the mind, to be open to, they use this term amongst the mystics, to listen for the voice of your creator, of your ancestors, your spirits, whatever's connected to you. You can't make that connection if you're not listening. So people are so busy just wanting to debate, argue, and fight. They got diarrhea of the fucking mouth. They're more interested in proving their little petty fucking points. They're more interested in proving their little personal belief systems, and they're not looking at the overall scheme of things. Like I said, they got blinders on like a horse. They don't see anything going on around them. The only thing they see is their allegiance to this ridiculous dogma or faith or creed that they subscribe to. It's comical. You understand what I'm saying? So we have to learn. I keep telling people that you should be doing internal work. Internal work. How do I still the mind? Part of stilling the mind is the many voices that communicate to us within ourselves, that we wrestle and struggle with every day. That's the Sutuk, Set, Usir, Osiris internal battle, the King and Abel willpower battle, the Enki and Leah. I've been talking about this a lot lately. That's the struggle that you go through in exercising your will to make correct, or sometimes in some cases incorrect decisions, and how they, you don't realize sometimes afterwards how they affect you. So what it's doing is showing you the battle that we deal with on a daily basis. It's just expressed via those stories. That's all. And we're supposed to correlate that information to ourselves and how we can work it on our path. Not literally, take these things literal and, turn it into, it's a whole religious dogma in itself. No. We're supposed to use these examples. And like Dr. Bynum used that example last night when he used the biblical quote, be still and know that I am God. That's a great, quote that you can use for personal alchemy. What does that mean to the alchemist / adept / magician? Well, I would apply it from a left-hand path of self-mastery perspective. From what I'm talking about now, be still sometimes, quiet the mind. And there's many ways to do it. Sometimes it's just simple as doing nothing, literally nothing. No TV, no music, no radio, no nothing. Sometimes it's just doing sitting in quiet, focus, concentration, or meditation in darkness and silence. Get that? Like, there's a thing called in masonry. I've talked about it here and there. There's a thing in masonry they use on the degrees called a mason has an attentive ear, right? That's the term. If you're a mason and you travel, you know what I'm talking about, right? That's one skill that a mason must perfect in their craft as they're going through the degrees, as they're going through the lodge. It is imperative that they have an attentive ear, okay? Now, what does that mean? Because remember, masonry, just like a lot of magic and alchemical paths, is conveyed through allegory, symbols, metaphors. It's very heavy. If you've gone through the Masonic Lodge, you know what I'm talking about. It becomes very intense, it becomes very heavy, and one must be able to understand the hidden meanings of these symbols and how they correlate it to themselves. So having an attentive ear, in my opinion, doesn't just apply to masonry, it applies overall on this path. And I liken the attentive ear concept to, we have people, they're listening, but are they hearing what's being conveyed, right? We have people that read, but there's a difference, in my opinion, of people who read as opposed to people who study and use what they study or use what they learn from what they study and apply it to themselves on a daily basis, to their magic, to their path to self-mastery, which in turn gives them the results they're craving for, like we all are. Regeneration, renewal, change, growth. You see that change reflected spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, via the results. The results confirm that what you're doing is successful. So now, don't get that twisted with, because I've been doing something. Here's the other problem. People get stuck like Chuck. Say it again, stuck like motherfucking Chuck. People get what I call complacent. They've been doing something for so long and so many years, they struggle with the very thought of separating from it, changing and going a different way. They think in their mind, or what's been enlarged in there subconsciously, well, I've been such and such or doing such and such for so many years, it has to be the right thing. And usually they're afraid of change. And they get stuck like Chuck because they get complacent, because it just becomes a regular routine. And there's no change and growth in that. So I want to stress that if you're an individual, let's say that's been a Muslim, a Christian, a Buddha, whatever it might be, and maybe thoughts have arisen in your mind where you've had questions and doubts about your faith, your spiritual system, that you were curious to explore and look further. You felt there was more to what you were being exposed to or knew. That is your higher self, your personal daemon communicating to you, reaching out to you, making you aware of that. To shut that down and not explore, to not look, to not seek more knowledge, to quest that, to quench that desire, you'd be doing yourself a disservice. You should never shut that portion of yourself down. Some call it the intuition, that's fine. Some call it their inner being, that's fine, whatever term. We call it on this path our personal daemon, our higher self, our real self. But I want to stress, that personal daemon is always expressed in the multiple personalities or fragments that are connected to us. And those fragments can be spirits that are connected to us, ancestral beings, and our correlation and relationship to that. And I've talked about that many times, how that is the foundation of building this path to self-mastery. Look at it as building a house. That, in my opinion, from my experience and from with others, that is the core foundation. So you should never suppress that. You should never, ever go against that, because you cut off your creativity, right? When you cut off your creativity, you disconnect from, I'll use a simple spiritual term, from what the universes and the multiverses give you access to. One, the multiverses are unlimited, and the multiverse is just another term for multiple universes. And that exists in the inner depths of this dark consciousness that we're talking about, or this darkness, right? The subjective realm, which is your power to create and is your ability that gives you that power as a god or a goddess, you disconnect from that. Because once you understand the power of that and how you connect with it and how you work with those realms, those subjective realms, you'll never understand truly how powerful you are. What cuts that creativity off is these three-dimensional. And let's talk a little bit about, Dr. Bynum was talking about the fifth dimension last night, right? Let's talk about how most people don't vibrate outside of the third dimension. Most people are three-dimensional beings. What does that mean? They're confounded by person, places, or things. Nothing that they do, all their spiritual or religious beliefs, is confounded by person, place, or thing. So they vibrate on a three-dimensional density, or they're three-dimensional beings, I should say. Whereas the first step to obtaining higher spiritual awareness and being receptive to all the shit we're talking about right now is that fourth dimension, where you break that time barrier. You start to tap into the astral or the spiritual realms, right? We talk about astral traveling a lot on this path. That's quasi 4. Once you start to speed up your frequency and your vibration, and you can vibrate at will as a 4-dimensional being, you have now opened yourself up to unlimited access of knowledge, information, connecting with the spirit world. I'm using terms people can relate to, which in turn really begins your step and process onto the realm. And he used light, and I want to talk about that, the fifth dimension, right? Dr. Delbert Blair used to also talk about the fifth dimension a lot. I brought up the term in some of my esoteric schools. We learn about it as that's the state which we really are, whole light beings, right? Now, when I'm saying light, I don't want you to get that, religious fluffy term of what life is, that light is. That's not what it's talking about. Light in the form of energy, not artificial light. See how they dumb it down in religion? You'll see pictures of prophets or even mystics and they have this light around their head, this aura, right? They create this light, right? Or they'll show images of the skies opening up and great light coming down. Everything takes you back to something that's artificial and